Something inside you has already begun to shift, a quiet withdrawal from the exhausting labor of making yourself comprehensible to those who refuse to see. You may not recognize it consciously yet, but the psyche has initiated a process that cannot be reversed. The endless justifications, the careful translations of your inner world into language others might accept, the apologetic tone when you dare to express what you truly perceive, all of this is falling away. This is not social failure. This is not bitterness or retreat. This is the self-reclaiming authority that was never meant to be surrendered. There exists a threshold in the life of the deeply sensitive person, a moment when the cost of being understood by those incapable of understanding exceeds what the psyche can sustain, and you have crossed it. What you are experiencing now is not collapse, it is conservation. The energy that poured out through 1,000 futile explanations is being drawn back into the depths where it belongs. And this changes everything. Through years of studying the psyche's protective mechanisms, I discovered that the empath's compulsion to explain serves not communication, but the denial of their own authority. The unconscious mind, in its wisdom, recognizes truth directly. It needs no committee, no consensus, no external validation to know what is real. But the conscious ego, trained by a world that demands conformity, learns to doubt what it perceives unless others confirm it. And so begins the exhausting performance. The constant effort to make the invisible visible, to prove that what you sense is legitimate, to justify your right to feel what you feel. This pattern reveals itself again and again in analytical work. The sensitive individual comes not because they doubt their perceptions, but because the world has taught them that perception without collective agreement is madness. They seek permission to trust what they already know, but here is where it becomes disturbing. The act of explanation itself becomes a mechanism of self-betrayal. Every time you translate your depth into shallow language, every time you simplify your truth to make it palatable, you teach your psyche that its natural voice is unacceptable. The compulsion to explain is not generosity. It is a subtle form of self-erasure. What appears as social withdrawal is actually the psyche's reclamation of energy previously scattered across 1,000 futile translations of your inner world. The unconscious will not sustain indefinitely what consciousness refuses to honor. When the authentic self is repeatedly edited, compressed, and apologized for, something in the depths simply stops, not in defeat, but in dignified refusal to participate further in its own diminishment. This is the turning point. This is where transformation begins. You feel it, do you not? The strange relief that accompanies what should feel like loss. The odd peace in letting others misunderstand you. The liberation in no longer carrying the impossible burden of making your complexity fit into their simplicity. The first sign reveals itself as a strange new resistance to verbal justification. You simply cannot summon the energy to explain yourself anymore. Where once you would have launched into careful explanations, offering context and background and nuance to help others understand your perspective, now there is only silence. Not hostile silence, not passive-aggressive withdrawal, but a calm, almost neutral refusal to engage in the old pattern. Someone challenges your boundaries, questions your choices, demands to know why you are the way you are, and something in you simply does not respond. This is not rudeness. This is the psyche protecting itself from further fragmentation. According to depth psychology, the self possesses an innate intelligence that operates beneath conscious awareness. It knows when communication serves connection and when it serves only the other person's need to reduce you to something manageable. The resistance you feel is not social anxiety or communication failure. It is wisdom. Your depths have recognized that certain minds will never comprehend certain truths, and the attempt to force comprehension drains the very energy needed for your own individuation. What became clear through decades of observation is that the sensitive person's explanations rarely produce understanding in those determined to misunderstand. The cynic will find weakness in your compassion. The shallow will find naivety in your depth. The defended will find threat in your openness. No amount of articulation can bridge the gap between someone who feels life in layers and someone who refuses to acknowledge that layers exist. The moment you stop trying to build that bridge, energy returns to your system like water flowing back into a well. Second, you begin to recognize how others' confusion about you is their own shadow material, not your responsibility to resolve. And this is perhaps the most liberating recognition in the entire process. What the collective unconscious shows us is that each psyche contains elements it cannot consciously accept. These rejected aspects, the shadow, must be projected outward onto others who embody what the psyche denies in itself. The person who calls you too sensitive is often fleeing their own unfelt grief. The one who labels you dramatic is suppressing their own emotional intensity. The critic who finds you exhausting is terrified of their own depth. For years, you absorbed these projections as truth about yourself. You tried to become less sensitive, less intense, less you. But projection is not perception. It is unconscious material seeking a screen, and you are not obligated to be that screen. The psyche operates in ways that protect its current structure, even when that structure is built on denial. Those who cannot tolerate depth in themselves will not tolerate it in you, and their discomfort reveals their own psychological work, not your deficiency. When you stop accepting responsibility for other people's projections, something shifts in the relational field. You become less available for the role of emotional translator, less willing to shrink so others can remain comfortable in their constriction. This feels selfish to the parts of you trained in self-abandonment. But individuation requires that you differentiate between genuine empathy and the compulsive caretaking that prevents others from meeting their own shadow. Your silence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, people must finally see themselves. What emerges third is a palpable restoration of vitality that was previously hemorrhaging through constant self-defense. The amount of psychic energy consumed by explanation is staggering. Every justification, every careful rephrasing, every attempt to make yourself less threatening or more comprehensible, these acts drain the life force needed for your own psychological development. Through years of studying the unconscious, this pattern emerged repeatedly. The sensitive soul arrives depleted, not because sensitivity itself is draining, but because the constant mediation between inner truth and outer acceptability exhausts the system. When the explanations stop, the energy does not disappear, it redirects. What was scattered outward in the futile attempt to be understood returns to the center. You notice you have more resources for your own creative work, your own inner development, your own authentic relationships. The fatigue that seemed inherent to your nature was never about being an empath. It was about being an empath in constant translation mode, forever converting your native language into something others could digest without discomfort. This restoration often brings guilt. You may feel you are abandoning others, withholding something they need, failing in your purpose as someone who bridges worlds. But here is what depth psychology reveals. Your purpose is not to drain yourself translating truth for those, who prefer illusion. Your purpose is to live as a demonstration of what becomes possible when sensitivity is honored rather than explained away. The world does not need more empaths performing emotional labor for those unwilling to do their own psychological work. It needs empaths who are so full of their own vitality that their presence alone shifts what is possible. The fourth pattern appears as existing relationships either deepen profoundly or dissolve completely. There is no middle ground. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop maintaining connections that exist only because you work harder than the other person to keep them alive. The relationships built on your constant accommodation, your willingness to be misunderstood, your acceptance of less than you deserve. These relationships cannot survive your silence. They were never mutual. They were sustained by your relentless effort to make them work, despite fundamental incompatibility. What the archetypal forces at work reveal is that certain connections serve the process of individuation, while others obstruct it. The psyche knows the difference, even when the conscious mind resists the knowing. When you withdraw your explanatory energy, relationships sort themselves naturally. Those who genuinely care will ask real questions, will sit with not understanding, will respect the mystery of you without demanding you make yourself smaller. Those who related to you only through your service, your accommodation, your willingness to absorb their projections, these people will drift away, often with accusations that you have changed, become cold, turned difficult. You have not become cold. You have become unavailable for relationships that require your self-betrayal as the price of admission. And yes, this process can be lonely. The space between the old connections falling away and new ones forming can feel like a void. But this void is not emptiness. It is potential. The psyche must clear the relational field before it can attract what truly belongs. Your silence is not pushing people away. It is allowing those who were never truly present to reveal themselves and depart. I recall a woman who came to me in profound distress over the dissolution of a long-time friendship. For years, she had explained her need for depth, her sensitivity to superficiality, her requirement for authenticity in conversation. The friend claimed to understand, but continued relating through pleasant superficiality and emotional unavailability. When my patient finally stopped explaining and simply withdrew her energy from the friendship, the friend responded with wounded anger, accusations of abandonment, claims that she had become judgmental and superior. What emerged in our work was the recognition that this friendship had survived only because my patient continually lowered her standards to meet the other person's capacity. The moment she stopped translating her needs into simpler terms, stopped accepting less than what nourished her, the fundamental mismatch became undeniable. The friendship ended, but in the space it left, 3 new connections formed. People who required no explanation, who met her depth naturally, who nourished rather than depleted her. The psyche had made room, and the right people arrived to fill it. Beyond this lies the collapse of the persona you constructed to seem reasonable to unreasonable people. The persona, as analytical work demonstrates, is the mask we wear to navigate social reality. It is necessary, adaptive, a legitimate psychological structure. But when the persona becomes so elaborate that it obscures the self, when you spend more energy maintaining the mask than nourishing what lives beneath it, the psyche will eventually revolt. The exhaustion you feel is not from being sensitive. It is from pretending to be less sensitive than you are. It is from performing normalcy in a world that pathologizes depth. When you stop explaining yourself, the persona begins to dissolve. Not all at once, but gradually. You notice you no longer monitor your reactions to ensure they fall within acceptable parameters. You stop apologizing for your perceptiveness, your intensity, your requirement for meaning. You cease performing the role of the reasonable empath who never makes others uncomfortable with the full extent of what you perceive. And in this dissolution, something authentic emerges, not the false self constructed to be acceptable, but the true self that existed before the world taught you to doubt it. This emergence can be destabilizing. The people in your life related to the persona, not to you. When the mask falls, they may claim you have become someone else, but you have not become someone else. You have stopped pretending to be someone you never were. The discomfort they feel is not about your transformation. It is about the loss of the predictable, manageable version of you they preferred. The self, in its wisdom, will not be managed. It will only be met, or not. Another sign manifests as an unshakable inner authority that needs no external validation to know what is true. This is perhaps the deepest gift of the silence. When you stop seeking confirmation from others, when you cease defending your perceptions against those who cannot perceive what you perceive, you are thrown back onto your own knowing. And in that return, you discover that your knowing is, and has always been, sufficient. Individuation, as depth psychology reveals, cannot occur while the psyche remains dependent on collective agreement for its sense of reality. The journey toward wholeness requires a differentiation from the collective, a willingness to stand in your own truth even when that truth isolates you from consensus. This does not mean arrogance or closed-mindedness. It means the development of an inner compass that operates independently of external approval. You begin to trust what you sense, what you feel, what you know in your depths, not because others confirm it, but because it arises from the self. This inner authority often feels like arrogance to those who have not developed it in themselves. You will be called stubborn, rigid, unwilling to listen. But there is a vast difference between the defended ego that refuses all input and the individual psyche that has learned to discern between genuine wisdom from others and mere pressure to conform. Your silence allows this discernment to develop. When you are not constantly explaining and justifying, you have the space to listen. Not to everyone, but to those whose insight genuinely expands your understanding rather than simply demanding you contract to fit their view. The seventh and final stage reveals itself when those who understand you appear without effort. Your silence becomes a beacon. This is the most unexpected outcome of the entire process. You might imagine that withdrawing your explanatory energy would leave you isolated, unseen, alone. But what emerged from analytical work is precisely the opposite. When you stop trying to be understood by everyone, you become visible to those who can actually see you. The psyche operates through resonance, like calls to like. Depth recognizes depth. But when you are busy translating yourself into shallow language, performing the persona of acceptable sensitivity, editing your truth to make it palatable, you obscure the very signal that would allow your true people to find you. Your silence is not a wall. It is a filter. It allows those who cannot meet you to fall away while simultaneously creating space for those who can. You may notice that new people enter your life who require no lengthy backstory, no careful explanation of your nature, no justification for your way of being. They simply get it. Conversations move immediately to the depths you crave. Understanding happens without effort. These are not better people than those who left. They are simply your people. And they could not find you while you were camouflaged in explanations, while you were working so hard to be comprehensible to those incapable of comprehension. This final stage often brings a recognition that feels both obvious and revelatory. The right people do not need you to explain yourself because they already speak your language. They do not require translation because they live in the same psychological territory you inhabit. Your silence did not drive them away. It cleared the path for them to arrive. And when they do, you understand that all the energy you poured into explaining yourself to the wrong people was energy stolen from building real connection with the right ones. When you stop translating your depths into shallow language, you discover that your presence alone communicates what words never could. There is a transmission that happens between individuated psyches, a recognition that operates beneath language. Those who have done their own psychological work, who have met their own shadow, who have suffered their own initiation into depth. These people perceive you accurately, without lengthy explanation. They sense what you carry because they carry something similar. They respect your silence because they know it is not withholding, but discernment. What becomes possible in this space is a new kind of relationship, one built not on your constant effort to be understood, but on mutual recognition between those who have traveled similar inner terrain. These connections do not drain you, they nourish you. They do not require you to shrink or explain or apologize. They invite you to expand, to reveal more, to bring the fullness of what you are. And in these relationships, you finally understand what you were seeking all along through those exhausting explanations. You are not seeking to be understood by people incapable of understanding. You were seeking permission to exist as you are, and that permission was never theirs to give. It was always yours to claim. The transformation is not that you become better at explaining yourself. It is that you stop believing explanation is necessary. You recognize that your worth is not determined by how well others comprehend you. Your truth is not less real because it cannot be reduced to terms that make the uncomfortable comfortable. Your depth is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be inhabited. And those who belong in your life will find their way to you. Not because you made yourself accessible to everyone, but because you finally stopped pretending to be something you are not. You now stand at the threshold where explanation ends and authentic existence begins. This is not isolation. This is not coldness or superiority or disconnection from humanity. This is the truest form of connection, the kind that happens when you stop performing accessibility and start living as yourself. The silence you have entered is not an ending. It is a beginning. It is the space where your real voice can finally emerge, where your genuine presence can be felt, where those who recognize you can find you without the interference of constant translation. What you are experiencing is not social withdrawal. It is psychological sovereignty. It is the reclamation of energy that was never meant to be scattered across the impossible task of making everyone understand you. It is the return to your own authority, your own knowing, your own truth. And from this place of centered silence, you will discover what you could never find through explanation: peace with who you are, connection with those who truly see you, and the freedom to exist without apology. You carry something rare in this world. Not everyone will understand it. Most will not. And that is no longer your concern. Your work now is not to explain yourself to those who cannot comprehend you. Your work is to live so fully as yourself that those who can comprehend you find their way home. The silence is not a barrier, it is an invitation, and those who are meant to accept it already know the way.